Welcome to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I'm your host, Darrell Scott, and together we will dive into the lives and careers of the jazz legends who have left a rhythmic imprint on the world. Be prepared to reminisce on the highs and the lows of their musical journey and the trials that sculpted their timeless musical gems. We'll preserve the legacy of these extraordinary maestros and find inspiration in the melodies of their lives. Subscribe now and never miss a beat. Now, let's get to the show. That was Uncrowned King by our guest today. I'm stuttering already because I'm just trying to understand how she gets this situation. Her name is Marion Hayden, from Detroit. If you know anything about Detroit, she went to Cass Tech. So she grew up around the age when Motown was in its heyday. Marion, first of all, welcome. But how do you go to jazz and the acoustic upright bass and not have Motown somewhere in your ingredients of life?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Darrell. It's very good to be here today. And just for listeners that don't know about the history of Detroit, Detroit is really one of the crucibles of Black music in the world, and all forms of Black music. So Motown is something that we became very known for really well in the 60s, which was, of course, sublime and really put so much of Detroit on the map in terms of more popular music. But even before then, because Detroit was one of the places where we got a lot of people coming here during the first great Black migration, early part of the 20th century. You have great blues players here. We had a great history of ragtime music. And to be honest, our jazz history is really second to none in the world. I put Detroit's jazz history second to none in the world. Because if you look at, say, for instance, just say for a recent example, the last batch of NEA jazz masters, so the National Endowment of Arts jazz masters, that
Hmm.
that particular prize, which I would categorize as the biggest prize that they give to a jazz artist here in our country. That the three living NEA jazz masters were all from Detroit, all three of them.
Really?
Regina Carter, violinist, dear friend of mine, someone that I've worked with for many years. We're co-founders of the group Straight Ahead. Kenny Garrett, the alto
Yes.
saxophone player, also
Hmm.
also Detroiter, and drummer Lewis Hayes. All three of those are Detroiters, and actually there are
Man.
more NEA jazz masters from Detroit than any other city. So really is it seems like Motown is the thing that gets a lot of kind of more certain kinds of press, but to be honest, the jazz history in Detroit here is really very, very deep, expansive, and it really is the underpinning of so much jazz that's going on in the world today, and has been that underpinning probably since the 1950s and 40s at the very least. We just lost Barry Harris. Barry Harris was probably the greatest living bebop pianist and a fantastic educator from Detroit. Barry raised so many people in the music. So many great proteges of Barry have been out there, and then there's proteges of Barry's proteges.
Hmm.
So Detroit, Detroit, the home of the great living legend Ron Carter, the
Oh,
most recorded jazz musician in the history of the music. Yep, Ron Carter from Detroit. The great Paul Chambers, probably someone who was best known for being the bassist on Miles Davis' "Kind of Blue," that recording that sold more copies than any other jazz record. So yeah, there's a heck of a history of jazz in Detroit. So to be honest, it's, that's where it is. That's what really is jazz. Now it's Motown, but Detroit is really Detroit Jazz City. That's what
So
it is.
I want to get to this since you've brought that up. It seems as though throughout the years, and I'll go decades, jazz as a whole does not get its due, does not get the proper media coverage, does not get the proper publicity. Now, for a while there, maybe in the what, late 70s, early 80s, there was just a rush of it. You had clubs, you had this, you had that, concert after concert, venue after venue, and then it all kind of disappeared. How do you feel about that, and how do we bring it back to the forefront?
Um, I think that jazz has never, well, I would say, in terms of my study of the music, there was a time when it was very much the popular music of the whole United States, of
Right,
everyone across the board, right?
right,
So especially we're talking, the 1930s, 40s, when that, especially when it was dance music, especially during the big band era, that would be, really, late 1930s, World War II and post World War II. That was when jazz was really America's music. And there began to be kind of a split in jazz, and parts of the music began to kind of stay in that more of a dance era. You started to get offshoots of rhythm and blues that were jazz but still danceable, and then there became jazz that uh, uh, the music turned really introspective, and people began to really drill down on this idea of improvisation, and really getting very really working that out. And I think when that happened, our we our the listenership, it became a different kind of music. It became less of a dance music, more of a listening music. And so when because of that, I just think there's a smaller audience. I don't think we've lost too much over these decades. I just think it's a there's the audience that comes to jazz now is coming for an elevated listening experience. And
yeah.
I think that's what really is going on. So I always tell folks, when I teach jazz history, that and I teach it oftentimes to sometimes to jazz to students that are in jazz studies departments. That sometimes I'm teaching it to people that don't know anything about the music, and the ones that don't know about the music, I do have to be sure and remind them that, um, like for instance, when you go and hear, if you go to see Beyonce, or you see a Beyonce record, right? It says Beyonce on there, but there's a lot of people that made that record sound good, right? It's not just there. She's not singing solo. So
Right,
when we study jazz, what you want to do is drill down and say, well, who's playing the bass on that?
right.
Who's playing the
Yes,
piano, right? You know what I
yes.
mean? And so that listening experience, that really deep dive listening experience, is one of the things that makes jazz, to me, so interesting. And I just think over the years we have a good audience for the music. It has not, maybe it's harder to get the music in the press, but I'll tell you, if you just put in jazz, and I'm sure
Oh yeah.
yourself, Darrell,
Yes,
so much, so
yes,
many festivals.
yes,
I mean, of international festivals. Back
yes.
Detroit, my hometown, is the home of probably the largest free outdoor jazz festival in the world, the Detroit Jazz Festival, which goes on Labor Day weekend, 4 days. Fantastic festival. I'm talking about everybody through there.
I actually have been to that. I, when I truly retire, I guess I should make it a bucket list thing to go to every festival, first of all, in the continental United States. Hmm, that's going to take me more
That
than a
sounds
year.
great.
And somehow meet up with all the people that I have the opportunity to talk to. Now let's talk about you and this acoustic bass. How did you become connected to the acoustic bass?
I was just, as I said, just really lucky. One of the things that I was, one of the ways I was really fortunate is that we had really great public school music education here where I grew up in Detroit. And that means that when I was in elementary school, when I was in the third grade, they came to our class. I remember, and they said, who would like to learn to take an instrument? And it's just come on downstairs and you can pick one out. And they hit strings at my little school. And so I went down, and I remember seeing a bass, and I really wanted to play a bass, but they did not have basses. So they had cellos there.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
I picked the cello, and I love that instrument just so much. It was very beautiful. I was kind of a tall girl. It was very pretty. We had really lovely furniture in my house, and it looked like a piece of furniture. Lovely wood, and it was really really pretty finish on it. And I love the sound of the instrument. And as soon as I got home, I started practicing my cello, and then I actually started trying to play jazz on the cello, because I had a lot of jazz was being played in my household via my father, who was a huge jazz fan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to be about 12, when I got tall enough, right? So you have to be kind of tall to play the bass,
Yeah.
and I switched over to bass, and that was it. I was in my little instrument heaven. That was the sound I loved. And I was really fortunate to be able to have some really great musicians from Detroit that were engaged in some youth jazz programs, which I believe so strongly in. And it was a summertime youth jazz program that my parents enrolled me in, and with a bunch of other little kids, young 12 and 13,
Mm-hmm.
13-year-olds that were, that really wanted to learn jazz. And those musicians that taught us jazz became mentors and friends of mine for my entire life, and they opened up a whole world of understanding the music, musicianship, the history and legacy of music from that. So that's kind of how it started for me.
And, and so, who are the influences of you during this period, this time?
Well, I would say probably my earliest influences were, in terms of recorded material, was what my dad had in his record collection, which was
Mm-hmm.
pretty extensive. But but he was a huge Miles Davis fan. So I used to have a lot of listen to a lot of Paul Chambers.
Mm-hmm.
He was a huge Oscar Peterson fan. So I used to listen to a lot of Ray Brown, right? He was in the Oscar Peterson trio at time. I used to listen to just whomever was Cannonball Adderley. I remember hearing that Cannonball Adderley and Nancy Wilson recording when that was probably about 15 when I heard that record. That just blew my mind. I just thought it was fantastic. So I listened to a lot of different folks and recorded music, and then here in Detroit, probably my first two earliest influences were two fantastic musician composers. One was a man by the name of Marcus Belgrave. Marcus Belgrave, who is
Mm-hmm.
a world-renowned trumpeter. He spent many years on the road with the Ray Charles Band. He worked with the Charles Mingus Band. He worked he worked with basically all kinds of Motown. Marcus is originally from Chester, Pennsylvania, but he moved here to Detroit probably in the late 60s, early 70s. So Marcus, I spent a lot of time on the stand with him learning the music. And then the other person would be Wendell Harrison. And Marcus passed in 2015. Wendell Harrison is still living, and Wendell's a saxophone player, composer. Wendell has played with been on the road with so many different bands. Then he came here when he's originally from Detroit. When he came back to Detroit from New York, he started a group called Tribe. And Tribe was not only a performing group, but they also they also put out educational materials. They had a magazine. Wendell's a record producer. He's someone that is just highly engaged, not only in the area of creating music, but also in the business of the music. And so those two are probably my first earliest mentors. And then it went on to people such as the great drummer Roy Brooks, the pianist Ken Cox, just so many others that were really just fantastic. Teddy Harris, who was a wonderful musical director. I spent many years on the stand with him, playing with touring bands when they came into a club that he was the MD for.
Hmm.
So it was really Detroit was is a wonderful way to learn the music in a way that I think is very authentic and very very steeped in the tradition, yet very scholarly. It
Thanks. Yeah,
demands a lot of you.
that is good. I am, I don't know, I was a closet bass player when I was younger, and I think I just couldn't understand it, especially the upright bass. What are the I guess I couldn't understand the techniques because I have no manual dexterity at all. At all. Um, Typing was a huge step for me. Um, Tell me about playing that instrument and just, and the other thing is I'm ambidextrous. So if I
Mm,
were to play guitar, I play it left-handed and I'm
ah,
right-handed.
mm.
So I say I'm just confused. Um, Give me some I don't know skills, some learning things of how you play the play the bass, get the fingers right. I watched a video of you and you're playing the taller end of it and making sounds. How do you do that?
Well, you know what? Here's what I say because I've been pretty fortunate to be able to do some teaching too. Um, I like a bass player who has learned the way I learned, which I learned fundamental techniques, classical bass techniques.
Hmm.
That's the best way. That's the best way to start the instrument, as far as I'm concerned, because the instrument demands, from some of whoever listeners may know that there's a such thing as they call the electric bass.
Hmm.
Sometimes they just call it the Fender bass, but Fender is just a brand of the bass. Really, it's an electric bass, and that one has actual frets on it. Those little lines on the neck board,
Right.
just like
Yes.
the guitar does, right?
Yes.
So of course, the upright bass does not have that. So in order to be able to play an upright bass and play it in tune, you have to practice the instrument. You have to practice in the positions of the instrument, which really are kind of measured by the size of your hand, right? So you have to you get your bass and you have to measure that instrument, measure where you are on the instrument, um, based on the position of your hand and the size, making sure that your hand stays in a certain position all the way up and down the fingerboard of the instrument. And it is a skill, and but just like anything else in music, you have to practice. So you have to have good method books, and that's kind of how you get on your way. My feeling, it works best if you learn how to read music. Some people don't. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you read music, that is going to open you up into a much broader world of music that you can play. You'll be able to play other people's compositions. You able to play a much broader range of styles of music if you can read. So I think primarily it's a matter of really working on the fundamentals of the instrument first. And then once you have those fundamentals, you have to learn the language of jazz, which is different than than Western classical language. The notes are the same. Jazz notates pretty well and pretty well Western classical notation, but the language is different because jazz is part of the language of African Americans, and our music has African influenced. So you have to you have to interpret it differently. And the best way to learn how to interpret jazz is to listen to records. You can't play jazz unless you listen to records. Can't play jazz bass, unless you listen to records. Go out and hear people that really do it well, which I did a lot of that as much as I could when I was a young person. I still do now. I go out and hear people play, and that that kind of feeds your idea source. You get bigger well of ideas that you can use.
So right now in the calendar year, say the year 2023, how much have you practiced? And what I mean, I just want to know the amount of time you have spent perfecting your craft.
You know what? My practice and at this point, as someone who's been doing it for a number of years, is very much related to what is on my studio stand. So I always spend I'm always going to spend at least an hour on the instrument or 2 hours on the instrument every day. And then if I have something that requires some actual particular time for me, I'll spend more. Like for instance, last year, the last couple of years, I've had two major works that I did that I performed on that really required a lot. In 2022, I performed on I guess it's kind of the premiere of um, the opera called The Life and Times of Malcolm X, which was
Hmm.
written by Pulitzer Prize winning composer Anthony Davis. So this was a really just a sublime piece that he wrote for a full orchestra. It's an opera, so it has, the soloist, soprano, baritone soloist. And it was just a really wonderful piece of music to be a part of. But this piece, Anthony is has a very broad idea about what music is. He composed in multiple meters, and there's a lot of ways in which the pieces just segue from one to another, and it really required a lot. Now that piece I probably had to spend about 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 hours a day for more than a month just to prepare to come into rehearsal for that. So it just depends. I say that to say that it just depends on what the piece of music is. Certain things don't require that, but I'm on the bass every day, and I like to practice different things. Sometimes I love Charlie Parker melodies. Any of the things that Charlie Parker has written are really interesting to me. They're very good for dexterity and for bebop feel. So I like to check out Charlie Parker. I write my own music, so a lot of times I have to spend some time just kind of working on music and composing, coming up with ideas. So there's always stuff to work on.
There's in the short period of time that we've talked, I've come up with 1,001 more questions, but there's some things I do want to get to. This being one of them. You and Regina Carter started a band called Straight Ahead.
Mhm.
How did that come together? Why was it? And it was necessary. Why did you do it? And I got the CD over there. But it's an all-female band. It's very good. It, what was the reasoning behind creating this group?
Well, um, Straight Ahead was actually the brainchild. We're part of Regina Carter and I, as well as pianist Alina Moore and drummer Galen McKinney, are part of the founding groups, but was actually the brainchild of a really wonderful vocalist from Detroit by the name of Mickey Braden. And if I remember it correctly, Mickey was working in a band with some musicians in Detroit, and I think that they ended up having to uh, they were working on kind of a long-term gig, maybe the 3 or 4 pieces, like piano, bass, drums, and a vocalist. And then the band, whoever it was that was running the club where they were playing, ended up feeling like they needed to cut one of the musicians for budget reasons, and
Right.
they decided to cut her. They cut the vocalist. So Mickey was really displeased about this,
Can't
and
blame
she
her.
said, and she said, "I will show you. I'll show you. I'll put my own band together of all women, and I won't have to take this." So it was a really more of a "I'll show you" moment, which
Right.
was what started the band. And then we just did what bands did. We took a just kind of a random night think we took like a Tuesday night at a club downtown in um in Detroit and just started working. We just started working. Originally, Regina was not with us at first because she was actually living overseas in Germany at the time when the band first started. But she joined us after maybe about, I think maybe we've been together maybe about a year or something, and we just started like other bands do. We really enjoyed each other's company. We had a good respect for each other as musicians, which is the main thing. Gender free, doesn't matter what gender you have to have respect for yourself. We were for yourself and for your musical partners, your collaborators. So we had a really great collaboration going, and we did with other folks here. As I said, Detroit's a really great jazz town, and there are expectations. If you're a functioning musician here in Detroit, you're expected to know how to read music, to be able to interpret different styles appropriately. Know how to handle yourself on a gig. And so the band just came from the, what I like to just say is just the great legacy of Detroit. It's one of the bands from the great legacy of Detroit. And then we were lucky enough to get a record contract in 1990, as a matter of fact. And so we put out some records then. And that was a really tremendous opportunity, because during those times record companies would really put some money behind you.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't think as much. It's a little different now. Let's
yeah.
just say it's a little different now. It's different. But anyway, we were very, very and on top of that, that band is still functioning. We've put out 4 records. We were just on the Detroit Jazz Festival with Regina in September, and we're touring to St. Louis this weekend. So
Nice.
we're really, really fortunate to be able to keep that project together for a good while.
I can't get a flight to St. Louis this fast. But now also you're teaching.
Hmm.
How'd you get into teaching? What do you teach? We'll just leave it at that. What do you teach? What do you want your students to learn? What are they going to learn? Tell me about your teaching.
Hmm. Well, I've been actually very fortunate. To be honest, one of my first teaching positions was at Tri-C, was at Cuyahoga Community College, Tri-C in Cleveland,
Hmm.
and I taught at the downtown campus. And that was my first opportunity to really have a chance to try my hand as a teacher. And that Tri-C has always had a really, really great jazz education program and a wonderful jazz festival as well. So I taught at Tri-C for 7 years. After I left Tri-C, I began teaching at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And generally, what my general teaching schedule is, I teach ensembles, small ensembles, which is a really important part of learning jazz. As far as I'm concerned, it is really where all the action is, because so much of what we do as players out here is small ensemble work. I love doing big band work. There's just not as much, but small ensemble work, there's there that is probably, I would say that's probably 80%, easily 80%, 85% of what most folks are going to be doing is small ensembles, trios, quartets, quintets, sextets. So I coach small ensembles. I also teach a class in jazz history and a class in African American music history, which is a little more expansive than just jazz. We talk about all forms of African American music in that class. And I also teach a teen jazz program for Michigan State University that goes on here in Detroit, which I really love, because it's really because I remember how exciting it was when I was a 14-year-old or 15-year-old to be able to learn the music and get it from some really great jazz players. And so I try I try to channel that level of enthusiasm and understanding of teenagers into my teaching at that class too. So it's I think that these days, um, my feeling is that the formalized jazz programs that are going on in colleges and universities across the country and certainly across the world are very important, but they must be tied also to some sort of activities that come on from the community standpoint. In other words, those musicians that live in the community should also have opportunities to engage with young people, because there's only so much learning that you can do of the music within the university or even high school context. That the I like to say getting a degree in jazz is a learner's permit. Now you must go out and get your actual license. But it's a
Nice.
good learner's permit. You can know a lot, but you have to get out there and do it.
I want to find your music. How can I get to your music? How can I know what you're doing? Do you have a website? Do you have email? What do you have?
I have a website, marionhayden.com, and there's all kinds of videos on there. If you look up my name on YouTube, there'll be several many things that come up, many things that I've done with Straight Ahead, and as well my own personal projects, which are really very different. My personal projects are tend to be narrative music. In other words, my
Oh,
my music is something that tells a story about some particular event, person, something that's happening in the community. Is what I really do. And so probably the one that I've been working on recently that I've been touring is a project called Ocean: The Life and Times of Phyllis Wheatley. And for those that don't know who Phyllis Wheatley was the first African American to publish a book in 1773 in Boston. And actually, the book was published in London, but she was an enslaved Black woman living in Boston, Massachusetts, and she has a really an interesting history. She was brought to the U.S. On a slave ship um, as an enslaved 9-year-old girl from the area of Senegal or Senegambia, because it wasn't really just Senegal at that area, at that
hmm.
time. And she was purchased by a Quaker couple to be the house servant. And but after they purchased her, they noticed that she was brilliant. She was just a brilliant little girl. And next thing you know, not only she wasn't just speaking her own language, but she was speaking English, French, and she could also speak German. So she was speaking three languages, and then she began to write poetry and all kinds of prose in English. And her poetry and prose was so outstanding that by the time she was about 20, in 1773, they sought a publisher for her. They could not get anyone to publish her work here in the United States. They had to go to London, and so they took a trip across the ocean to London and got a book of her, a collection, basically a collection of her works published.
He-
And so, yes, this year is the 250th anniversary of the publication of the first book by an African American, by Phyllis Wheatley. So I wrote a whole suite of music about that, in which we recite some of her poetry, talk a little bit about her life, and then I compose music to reflect on about that legacy.
Here's the thing that I have found interesting in starting this podcast project. In everyone that I've talked to, there's an underlying thing going on. And what I mean by that is it's not just the music. You have this whole other, we'll call it personality, so to speak, that you are doing that I don't know if everybody knows about. So I appreciate the honesty. I appreciate hearing about this. And I want our listeners to understand that it's not just being a musician. That's the one thing that's out there, and that's excellent. And you are tremendous at what you do. But the other things that you do, whether it's the teaching, this Phyllis Wheatley project, all the things that you have going on are the things that I don't think anybody knows about that need to get more and more publicity. Marion, I truly appreciate that. This has been a tremendous learning experience. I'm happy that we finally got together. We'll go back to the website and we'll have people, learn about your stuff, find out about the history of Straight Ahead, the things that you're doing and everything that you have going on. And I won't hold it against you that you teach at the University of Michigan. I won't let that bother me. I will.
Hey, I'm wearing red for you today. I'm trying to be an ally, but sorry, go blue.
And that's the other thing. There's so many commonalities between the folks that I get to talk to. I appreciate this. We will follow you. If there's ever anything that the Jazz Flyte Podcast can do, please let us know. We will do
Darrell,
our best.
Thank you for having me today. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Not a problem. This is just good. And it's fun. I was watching a couple of videos this morning of you playing, and there's one that I think the song starts with a solo. And I sit here like a little kid going, how does she do that? How does she do that? Don't ask her that. Ask her that. So I appreciate it. And before I forget, we'll talk about this once we're done. Mary, once again, greatly appreciate it. Look forward to everything that you're doing. Once again, like I said, if there's anything that we can do, please let me know. You have all my contact information, and you have Cliffy's contact information, which is probably more important than mine.
Cliffy is my girl from way back. I met Cliffy when I first started teaching at Tri-C. She's a tremendous person, such an asset to the Cleveland community, and Cleveland is like a second home to me. So I certainly love my Cleveland folks.
Well, next time,
many good days, some great music from that. Yet another one of the great jazz towns of this country.
And the next time that you're here, and I heard a little birdie tell me something that I'm not going to tell you, but I heard a little birdie tell me that there's a possibility that we might be seeing each other next year. But that's all I'm saying. So. That's all I'm saying. I can't say anything else. To the listeners, thank you for listening. Marion Hayden, check her out. But in the meantime, if there's always anything you wish to reach out to the podcast about, you can hit me up on the email at jazzflyte@gmail.com. Once again, thank you. And we'll talk again next week. This has been fun. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you. Thanks, Darrell.
Thank you for tuning in to the Jazz Flyte Podcast. I hope you enjoy these stories and soulful melodies that grew through the doors of time. If you want to stay connected with the latest updates and episodes, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Until next time, I'm Darrell Scott.